the more I try to understand the Albanese government, the more confused I become. Today we learned that NDIS Minister Bill Shorten will be representing Australia at a Ukraine peace summit in Switzerland. And we also learned today that some people on the NDIS have been spending $10,000 on taxpayer-funded holidays. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that the two are related, but I am confused as to why the Minister for Disabilities is flying off to Europe to talk about the war with Russia. Shorten says he will use his appearance at the global summit to warn that Russian President Vladimir Putin can't be allowed to triumph in Ukraine, as it would embolden autocrats around the world. Well, for the $620,000 we learned yesterday that Bill Shorten was paying his speechwriter, I expect his summit address may well end the war.
If you're trying to link me to that, good luck. The point about it is the person involved who's the speechwriter does a very good job. I'm not responsible for negotiating a contract.
Shorten may not be the defence minister, but he's certainly the defensive minister. If only he could make a speech to NDIS rorts. Peace in Ukraine may well be easier. But why would the disabilities minister, rather than, say, the defence minister or the foreign minister, be putting forward Australia's position on the war in Ukraine? Maybe it's because our defence minister is embarrassed to show his face. Last December, the Ukrainians requested our government send them an urgent shipment of coal to keep their power going through winter. Well, 6 months later, they still haven't received even a reply. The Ukrainians shouldn't feel special, though. We don't know if we'll have power in summer. Nevertheless, Richard Marles insists we're committed to helping Ukraine, which is why earlier this year we buried 45 Taipan helicopters rather than donate them to our beleaguered allies in Kiev. Maybe the government's reluctance to send urgently needed coal to Ukraine has something to do with the government's ideological hatred of the stuff. Maybe they just can't get their heads around the idea that coal, which Energy Minister Chris Bowen continually demonises, could actually be used for humanitarian purposes. No, we can't have that. That would be sending mixed messages. Then again, this government specialises in mixed messages. Foreign Minister Penny Wong last night affirmed that Hamas was indeed a terrorist organisation, but in the same breath, she refused to rule out supporting a Palestinian state in which Hamas had a governance role.
The world is confronted with a catastrophic set of circumstances. We have a terrorist group, Hamas, which is dedicated to the destruction of the State of Israel and the destruction of the Jewish people. We have a conflict. Civilians are dying. A two-state solution is ultimately the only path to peace and security for Israel.
So Hamas is a terrorist group that the Albanese government could get behind if backing terrorists, which is illegal, helped promote peace, which is ridiculous. Is it little wonder protesters feel emboldened to chant for Hamas? Speaking of anti-Israel protesters, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has finally been moved to condemn them, declaring that the protesters' actions were appalling and had no place in a democracy. The PM took time out today to comfort those traumatised by the angry mobs. And he spoke words of sympathy to those whose property had been vandalised by pro-Palestinian supporters. But you'd be wrong to assume he was speaking to terrified members of the Jewish community in Caulfield or to Jewish worshippers at a synagogue. No, the Prime Minister was speaking to members of his own government in a Labor caucus meeting. You see, this week a number of Labor electorate offices were targeted by the pro-Palestinian supporters. And suddenly, well, the PM was highly motivated to act. You see, red paint was splashed across the front of Attorney General Mark Dreyfus and NDIS Minister Bill Shorten's suburban offices. Protesters also wrote slogans accusing the MPs of being complicit in genocide. The Prime Minister lamented it had been a difficult time for a number of his MPs and their staff. Now, I'm not saying the PM shouldn't be outraged by the wanton vandalism of electorate offices, and I'm not suggesting office staff don't deserve support. But you have to wonder how the Jewish community felt to see the speed at which the Prime Minister pushed back on protesters when it was Labor MPs who were being targeted. But none of that was as confusing as the fact that Andrew Giles remains in charge of the immigration portfolio. The immigration minister's incompetence is, by now, the stuff of legend. The minister who created a direction, only to blame bureaucrats for following the direction he created, has now started cancelling decisions made in accordance with his direction while working night and day on a new direction to fix the mess created by his original direction. And if that sounds confusing, well, imagine how he feels. Yet we're assured by his cabinet colleagues Andrew Giles is doing a great job. This is the minister who said on Friday that drones were being used to track the movement of foreign-born criminals before admitting Monday drones were not being used at all. Well, the ears of Defence Minister Richard Marles must have pricked up at the mention of drones since, despite continually being told that war is imminent, our military haven't got a single attack drone. We can't afford them. Of course, we might find some more money for defence if we reform the NDIS. But the NDIS minister, well, he's in Europe, giving speeches to an ally we can't spare a lump of coal for, while the foreign minister is holding out an olive branch to Hamas as Hamas supporters vandalise government offices, and we still have no direction. What a mess.